It was a moment I never expected, not in a million years. The kind of moment that plays out in movies, but you never think will happen to you. I was sitting there, in the plush, dimly lit corner of the hotel's VIP lounge, trying to blend into the background. I'd been coming here for weeks, ever since I'd been granted access as part of a deal I'd made at work. It wasn't really my scene, but I needed the quiet, needed the time away from everything. So, I sat there alone, watching the world through the large glass windows, the city lights twinkling in the distance. People were milling about, all busy in their conversations, their lives, but none of it mattered to me. It was just background noise. What was important to me was the peace, the space to think. My thoughts were scattered: work, life, regrets, and decisions I'd been avoiding for far too long. My mind was racing, trying to find something to hold on to, when my attention was suddenly pulled toward the door. The moment the door opened, I felt it. The shift. It wasn't that it was a loud or dramatic entrance. No, it was far quieter than that. But something in the air seemed to change, a stillness, a certain weight, as if the world had collectively held its breath. And then she stepped in. She wasn't a face I recognized, but the way she carried herself told me everything I needed to know. She moved through the room with a confidence that was almost palpable, the kind of confidence that made the room seem smaller, like all eyes were already on her, even if they weren't. She didn't glance around or make small talk. She didn't need to. She had a presence that filled the space without saying a word. I watched her as she passed, but there was one thing that I didn't expect. As she walked past me, our eyes met, just for a second. But it was enough. In that fleeting moment, I saw it, the flicker of recognition. Not the kind of recognition you get from meeting someone you know, but something deeper, a knowing. She froze. It wasn't a full-on stop, but it was enough to make the whole room feel like it had paused with her. For the briefest moment, she stood still, her gaze locked onto mine, and I could see the way her posture stiffened. It was as though the world had shifted under her feet, and she wasn't sure how to regain her balance. But then, just as quickly, she seemed to shake it off, turning away and continuing her path. Her steps were slower now, more deliberate, as if she was trying to convince herself that nothing had happened. I couldn't breathe. My heart was beating in a way that felt unfamiliar. What was that? Why did she react that way? I had no idea who she was. So why did it feel like she had just seen something that shook her to her core? I watched her for a moment longer, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she disappeared into the crowd, blending into the noise and chatter, like she was nothing more than another face in a room full of strangers. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That fleeting, strange connection lingered, hanging in the air like a question that hadn't yet been answered. I stayed there, staring into the space where she had been, my thoughts spinning in all directions. What had just happened? What had I seen in her eyes? It wasn't curiosity, it was something else, something deeper. And I had a feeling that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand, but it was already too late to turn back. The strange thing was, I felt like I had no choice but to follow. I couldn't stop thinking about her. The whole rest of the evening felt like it was happening to someone else. I was supposed to be networking, mingling with the usual crowd of executives and high rollers, but all I could think about was that brief encounter in the VIP lounge. The way her eyes locked with mine for just a moment, and the way she froze, like I had just cracked open some long-forgotten secret. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, a weird coincidence. Maybe she had just glanced in my direction by accident, or maybe it was nothing more than a reflex. But deep down, I knew it was more. That tension in the air, that sudden shift when she walked in, it couldn't be ignored. After she disappeared into the crowd, I tried to pull myself together. I forced myself to smile and join a conversation with some colleagues. We talked about business, the upcoming merger, the usual boring stuff that kept people pretending to be interested. But my mind kept wandering back to that brief moment. What was it? Was it something she saw in me? Was it something I had done? I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, something that had to do with me. Time seemed to drag on, and every passing minute felt like an eternity. I couldn't focus on anything, my thoughts constantly drifting back to that single, inexplicable moment. My drink was long gone, and the noise of the crowd around me faded into background static. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, pulsing in my ears, matching the rhythm of my anxiety. When I finally decided I needed to leave, I made my way to the exit. I grabbed my coat, telling myself that I was done for the night. As I walked through the lobby, the doors to the VIP lounge caught my eye again. I stopped for a moment, hesitating. Something was pulling me back. I don't know what it was, but my feet seemed to move on their own. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lounge was quieter now, with only a few scattered guests remaining. I could feel the tension in the air again, though this time it wasn't just me. The room felt different, heavier. It was as if everyone who had been here before had disappeared, leaving behind a strange silence that made the whole space feel unnerving. And then, there she was again. She wasn't sitting or standing with the other guests, but off to the side near the large windows, looking out at the city. Her back was to me, but I could feel her presence, the same way I had before. She wasn't alone this time. A man was standing next to her, his arm around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. They were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly, but something deep inside me stirred, something that told me this wasn't the innocent meeting I had hoped for. I stepped back, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of the scene in front of me. Was this some kind of coincidence too? Was this just how things played out in places like this, with people constantly shifting alliances, pretending to be someone they weren't? I stayed at the edge of the room, hidden in the shadow of a pillar, watching as they interacted. There was no denying the closeness between them. The way she laughed at something he said, her head tilting back slightly, her hand resting on his chest. I had never seen her like this before, not with anyone. The way she moved, the way she spoke, there was something intimate about it, something that didn't sit right with me. And then, as if sensing my presence, she turned her head. Her eyes flicked over to where I was standing, and for a split second, she locked eyes with me again. But this time, it was different. This time, there was no hesitation, no confusion. She knew exactly who I was, and she knew exactly what she had just done. I saw the faintest flicker of guilt cross her face, but it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. She turned back to the man beside her, saying something in his ear that I couldn't hear. Her body language shifted, a subtle but unmistakable signal that she was shutting me out, pushing me out of the picture. I stood there, frozen, as 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What was this? What had I just seen? How had we gone from a seemingly normal evening to this? Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our relationship, suddenly felt like it was crumbling right before my eyes. I felt the weight of the situation settle on my shoulders. My mind was spinning, and for the first time that night, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should confront her, if I should walk away, if I should even say anything at all. But one thing was certain, I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when everything had just changed in a single, impossible moment. I couldn't move. I stood frozen, my eyes glued to Claire and the man beside her. I could feel my chest tighten, the pressure building up as I watched them. Her, the woman I thought I knew, laughing at something that had clearly been meant just for them. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, the room around me spinning. For a moment, I almost couldn't believe it. What had I just walked in on? I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to make her explain herself, to confront her right here, right now. But I couldn't. There was something in the air, something that told me if I walked up to her, I might be stepping into a world I wasn't prepared for. My feet were glued to the floor as I tried to make sense of what I had seen. I couldn't take my eyes off her, her hair, her smile, her whole demeanor. She wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't the woman I'd spent the last 10 years of my life with. This was a stranger, someone else entirely. And this man, this stranger next to her, wasn't just a friend. He was too close, too comfortable. I watched as he leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and her hand rested casually on his chest. There was no hint of hesitation, no awkwardness. They were a couple, in the purest sense of the word. And in that moment, everything clicked. The reason she had been distant lately, the late nights at work, the sudden change in her behavior. It all made sense now. But the truth was more painful than I had imagined. She had been hiding this from me for who knows how long. I turned away, my head spinning with the weight of the discovery. I wanted to leave, to get out of this nightmare of a situation, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear myself away, not yet. I needed answers. I needed to know what was really going on, to understand how everything had fallen apart so quietly, so subtly, without me even noticing. I couldn't face her right now, not like this. Not when I was still processing everything. I needed a plan, a way to confront her without completely losing myself. So, I turned and made my way to the back of the lounge, trying to collect myself. I found an empty seat in the corner and slumped into it, burying my face in my hands. The world felt like it was spinning, like everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Every passing second made my anxiety worse, as the reality of the situation sank in deeper. I couldn't help but replay the scene over and over in my mind, like a broken record. Claire, so comfortable with this man. Her laughter, her touch, the way she had looked at me when I caught her. It was clear as day now, she had been hiding something, and she had been doing it for a while. I could hear their voices now, faintly, over the hum of the room. Claire's voice, soft and smooth, the way she used to speak to me when we first met. But this time, it wasn't for me. It was for him. Her words were filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time. Genuine affection, warmth, a level of intimacy that was reserved for someone else. Not me. I felt the tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't let myself break down, not here, not now. There was too much at stake. I had to stay composed. I had to figure out what to do next. I could feel the tension building in my chest, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Every part of me wanted to confront her, to march over there and demand an explanation. But the other part of me, something darker, something more rational, knew that doing so might lead to nothing but more pain, more confusion. I had to be strategic. I had to gather my thoughts, my facts, and only then could I confront her. But as I sat there, waiting for the right moment to act, I realized something else. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. No, this was something deeper, something I hadn't been prepared for. Betrayal. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but the truth was staring me right in the face. Claire had been unfaithful, and in that moment, everything changed. I wasn't just the confused husband in a bad situation anymore. I was someone with a plan, someone who needed to make sense of the mess that had been created, someone who was going to take control of this twisted narrative. But as much as I wanted to act, I knew I couldn't rush it. I had to wait. I had to be smart about this. I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. Not this time. For now, all I could do was sit in the shadows, watching. Watching as the life I thought I knew continued on without me, as Claire continued to lie to my face, as the world around me spun out of control. And all I could think was, how far would she go? How deep did this go? I didn't have the answers yet, but I would. I would find out. The hours dragged on like a slow burn. I couldn't shake the image of Claire with him. The way she had looked at me when our eyes met, and the way she quickly turned away, like I was an afterthought, a distant memory. I kept telling myself that I should confront her, that I should storm over to where she was sitting with him and demand the truth. But something in me knew that this wasn't the right time. I wasn't ready to hear what she might say, and deep down, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear it. As the evening wore on, the hotel lounge began to fill with more people, the atmosphere growing louder, more chaotic. But it felt like I was in a bubble, separated from the noise and bustle of the crowd. I could hear snippets of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter, but my mind was far away, fixated on Claire and that man. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I tried to look away, I found my eyes drifting back to her, almost as if my body was moving on autopilot. She wasn't sitting with him anymore. Now, they were standing by the windows, talking in hushed tones, and I couldn't help but notice the way she leaned in, the way she smiled at him with a warmth I hadn't seen in her for months. It was as if she had shed the mask she had been wearing at home, the coldness, the distance, and became someone else, someone completely different from the woman I thought I knew. I wanted to believe that I was overreacting, that maybe I was reading too much into it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something was happening, something I couldn't ignore. I had spent years with Claire, and I knew her better than anyone. I could see it in her eyes, the way she couldn't meet mine for too long, the way she always seemed to have an excuse for being somewhere else. I glanced at my phone, checking the time. It was late. Too late. I had spent hours in this hotel, stewing in my thoughts, watching the scene unfold without being able to act. The man beside Claire had disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing alone by the bar. Now it was my chance. I knew that if I didn't confront her now, I might never get the chance again. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I walked toward her, each step feeling like a mile. The closer I got, the more my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the weight of the conversation that was about to take place, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But there was no turning back now. I had to know the truth. When I reached her, she looked up, her expression unreadable. She seemed surprised to see me, but not in the way I expected. There was no guilt, no shame in her eyes, just a distant calmness. She took a sip of her drink and set it down on the bar before turning to face me. "Gregor," she said quietly, her voice calm, almost too calm. "I didn't expect you to come over here." I stood there, staring at her, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't the conversation I had imagined. I thought I would be filled with anger, ready to confront her with all the evidence I had seen tonight. But instead, I was filled with a strange emptiness. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath me, and I was standing on something fragile, something I couldn't trust. "Who was that man?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the answer, but I had to ask. I had to know. Claire paused, her eyes flickering for just a second, and then she looked at me, her expression softening slightly. "His name is Liam," she said. "He's someone I've been seeing." The words hit me like a slap across the face. For a moment, I couldn't process them. "Seeing?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You've been seeing him? What do you mean by that?" Claire seemed to hesitate, and for a second, I thought she might lie, that she might try to cover it up. But instead, she let out a long sigh, as if she had been holding this in for far too long. "I've been unhappy for a while now, Gregor," she said, her voice barely audible. "And Liam, he makes me feel alive. Something I haven't felt in a long time." I felt my stomach drop. The words were like a slow poison, seeping into me, taking root in places I didn't even know existed. "So this is it then?" I asked, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. "You've been seeing him behind my back? All this time?" She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I never wanted to hurt you, Gregor. But I've been so lost, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix us." I stood there, trying to make sense of it all. I had no words. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, to demand an explanation for everything. Why she hadn't told me sooner, why she hadn't tried to make things work with me. But instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of numbness wash over me. Everything we had built together, every moment we had shared, suddenly felt meaningless. It was as if I had been living in a lie, a carefully constructed lie that had finally been shattered. "I don't know what to say." I finally managed to choke out, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, looking at me with a mixture of regret and sorrow. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand the emptiness that was spreading between us. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone in the very place where everything had fallen apart. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get out of that place. The cool air outside hit me like a wave, and I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my thoughts. The city's lights seemed so distant, a blur of movement and color that felt nothing like the stillness in my chest. I walked aimlessly, my mind spinning with the revelation Claire had just given me. She had been seeing him. Seeing Liam, of all people. The man who had shown up at our hotel tonight. So confident, so assured in his place by her side. The thought made my stomach churn with a bitter cocktail of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I kept walking, my feet carrying me further away from the hotel, from her, from everything that had once felt solid. The streets were quiet, the kind of silence that felt suffocating, like the world was waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. I had never imagined I'd be in a situation like this. Not with Claire, not with anyone. She had been my partner for so long, my best friend, the one I turned to when the world felt heavy. And now, in a single night, everything had crumbled. What stung the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had been blind to it for so long. I had been living a lie, and the truth had been right in front of me all along. The late nights at work, the sudden emotional distance, the unexplained absences. It had all been there, glaring at me like a neon sign, but I had ignored it. I had wanted to believe that everything would work out, that the cracks in our relationship were just temporary. But now, it was clear, there was no going back. I stopped in the middle of the street, looking up at the sky. The stars were barely visible, drowned out by the city's glow, but I didn't care. I wasn't looking for answers in the sky. I was looking for something else, something that would make sense of all of this. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, but I had to keep moving. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long moment, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I go home? Should I confront Claire again? The thought of going back to that apartment, back to the life we had built together, seemed impossible. The idea of facing her after everything that had happened was suffocating. But I couldn't run forever. I couldn't just let her walk away, let this man Liam waltz into my life and take everything I had. I decided to send her a message. A simple one. No long explanation, no questions, just the truth. I needed her to understand, to feel what I was feeling. I typed out the words, my fingers trembling as I pressed send. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I need to figure things out, alone. As soon as I sent it, I felt a strange mix of relief and panic. I had drawn a line in the sand. There was no going back now. Claire would know what it meant. There was no hiding from it anymore. I walked for hours, just trying to clear my head. The city felt like it was closing in on me. Each street a reminder of how small I felt, how insignificant. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been wrapped up in Claire. For years, I had believed that we were a team, that we would weather any storm together. But this wasn't something I could fix. This wasn't something that could be patched up with apologies or explanations. This was something deeper, something irreversible. I finally found myself standing at a small park, the kind that was hidden away from the main roads. It was quiet here, peaceful, the kind of place that made you feel like you could be alone with your thoughts without the world intruding. I sat down on a bench and let out a long breath, trying to quiet the storm inside my mind. What was next for me? How do you pick up the pieces after something like this? It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the future that had been stolen from me. The life I thought I was going to have, the family, the home, the shared dreams. They were all gone now. And as much as I wanted to blame Claire, to hate her for what she had done, I knew I couldn't. This wasn't just her fault. This was a culmination of years of neglect, of things left unsaid, of both of us walking down different paths without even realizing it. The truth was, I didn't know who I was without her. And that was the hardest part of all. I had spent so many years defining myself through our relationship, through us. But now, I had to figure out who I was, standing alone in the wreckage. I had to rebuild, but I didn't even know where to start. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, hoping it was Claire, hoping she had realized her mistake. But it wasn't her. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it hesitantly, and the words made my blood run cold. You don't know the whole story, Gregor. Meet me tomorrow. I have answers you need to hear. The message was signed simply, Liam. My heart skipped a beat. What did he want from me? Why was he reaching out? Was this just another lie, another layer to the tangled web Claire had woven? I stared at the screen, the weight of the message sinking in. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what he wanted. I had to understand what this was really about. For the first time since everything had shattered, I felt a strange sense of purpose. It wasn't over yet. I wasn't going to let her walk away, and I wasn't going to let him think he had won. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it, no matter how deep I had to dig. Tomorrow, I would meet him, and I would get the answers I needed. The day after I received Liam's message, I barely slept. My mind was racing, my thoughts tangled in a web of confusion, anger, and uncertainty. I couldn't stop replaying the events from the night before. Claire's coldness, the way she looked at me like a stranger, and then the revelation that she had been seeing Liam. Who was this man? Why had he reached out to me? And what answers did he think he could give me that would make any sense of this twisted situation? I spent the morning pacing, unable to sit still. I had to know. I had to understand everything. But part of me wondered if I was making a mistake, if meeting him would only open up more wounds, things I wasn't ready to face. But the other part of me, the part that had been left in the dark for far too long, knew that I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let this slip by without getting the truth. By the time I got to the place he had specified, a small cafe near the edge of the city, it was already late afternoon. The sun was starting to dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the street. The cafe was quiet, a little out of the way, with a few tables occupied by people who seemed lost in their own worlds. I walked in, scanning the room for him, trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to unfold. And there he was, Liam. He wasn't what I expected. I don't know what I had imagined, but the man sitting at the table was calm, collected, almost too composed for someone who had been part of such a delicate, hidden mess. His eyes met mine as I approached, and he gave me a nod, gesturing for me to sit. There was no hostility, no aggression in his demeanor, just a quiet certainty, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Gregor," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm glad you came." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was supposed to say, what kind of reaction he was expecting from me. There were so many questions swirling in my mind, so many things I needed to ask, but I couldn't seem to form the words. "Why?" I finally blurted out, my voice thick with emotion. "Why, Claire? Why did you do this to me?" Liam didn't seem shocked by my question. He just leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "It's not that simple," he said. "I didn't do this to you. I'm not the one who walked away from what was real." His words hit me like a slap, and I could feel my pulse quicken. "What do you mean by that?" I demanded, my frustration rising. "Are you telling me this is my fault? Are you saying I had something to do with this?" "No," he replied, his tone calm but insistent. "I'm not saying it's your fault. But Claire, she was never happy. Not with you. Not with the life you two were living. She stayed, and I understand why. But the truth is, she's been looking for something else. Something she didn't find with you." His words stung, each one cutting deeper than the last. "You don't know anything about our relationship," I said through clenched teeth, trying to hold on to the shred of control I had left. "You don't know what we've been through." Liam didn't flinch. "I know enough," he said softly. "I know enough to see that Claire has been lost for a long time. And she needed someone to show her that there was more to life than what she had." The weight of his words settled in, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. The anger I had been feeling seemed to dissolve into a dull ache in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, how he had no right to judge my marriage. But another part of me knew he was speaking a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. "She never told me," I said, my voice shaking now. "She never said any of this to me. She just disappeared. One day, she was there, and the next, she was gone." Liam's expression softened for a moment. "I know it must be hard to hear, but this isn't about you, Gregor. Claire wasn't happy, and she's been trying to figure out how to fix that, but she couldn't. Not with you, not with anyone." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't the confrontation I had imagined. I had expected anger, accusations, maybe even a fight. But what I was hearing now was something else entirely. This was the truth, raw and painful, and it was forcing me to face the reality I had been avoiding for so long. I never saw it. I whispered, more to myself than to Liam. I never saw how far she had slipped away. How could I have been so blind? Liam looked at me with a kind of sympathy that I wasn't sure I wanted. "You weren't blind, Gregor. You were just in love. And sometimes, love makes us see things through a different lens. But Claire's heart was elsewhere long before you knew it." There was a long pause between us. The weight of everything was crushing, and I felt like I was suffocating under the realization that my marriage had been falling apart for far longer than I had ever suspected. All of those little signs, Claire's distance, her late nights, her strange moods, they all made sense now. But hearing it from him, hearing it from the man who had been part of the picture, somehow made it all the more real. I didn't know what to say to him. What could I say? He had shattered everything I had believed about my life, about my relationship. And yet, I couldn't deny the truth in his words. Claire hadn't been happy, and maybe, just maybe, she had been looking for something that I couldn't give her. "Is she happy now?" I asked quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Liam paused before answering, his gaze steady. "I don't know, Gregor. But I can tell you this, she's free now. Free to make the choices she's been avoiding for so long." The words hit me hard, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. The pain of it all, the finality, the loss, it was overwhelming. I had hoped, in some twisted way, that this meeting would give me some clarity, some sense of closure. But instead, it had only opened a floodgate of emotions that I wasn't ready to deal with. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Liam didn't try to stop me. He just watched me with a quiet understanding in his eyes. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this new reality. I didn't know where to go from here. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the doors swinging shut behind me. The world felt too big, too overwhelming. And yet, somehow, for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had the answers now, and I didn't know if that made it better or worse. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside the cafe. The conversation with Liam echoed in my head, every word, every look, burning into my thoughts. The weight of it all settled heavily on my chest, suffocating me with its truth. Claire had been searching for something that I couldn't provide, something I never even knew she was looking for. And now, after everything, it seemed like she had finally found it. But as I walked through the empty streets, the city's noise muffled around me, I realized something. I wasn't angry. Not in the way I thought I would be. I wasn't furious with Liam or even with Claire. I felt a quiet, hollow ache instead, a sadness that seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't pinpoint what exactly hurt the most. Was it the betrayal? The realization that Claire had never been happy? Or was it the sense of losing everything I had built, everything I thought I knew? I walked aimlessly, letting my feet guide me, the dim streetlights flickering as I passed. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was even supposed to do. The life I had known was slipping away, and all I could do was try to make sense of it. My thoughts kept circling back to Liam's words. She wasn't happy, Gregor, and she's been trying to figure out how to fix that. The finality in those words was hard to ignore. Claire had moved on long before I ever realized it. And now, she was free, in a sense. Free to do whatever she wanted, free to live a life that didn't include me. That truth twisted in my gut. It made my whole body feel heavy, like I was carrying a burden I hadn't asked for. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, wondering if I should reach out to her, if there was even anything left to say. A part of me wanted to confront her, demand more answers, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was already done. Claire had made her choice. And no amount of pleading, no amount of questions would bring us back to where we once were. A text from Claire suddenly appeared on my screen, a message that I didn't even know how to read. I know what you must be feeling right now. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't keep living a lie. I hope one day you can understand. I'm sorry. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the nearest wall, but instead, I just let it fall from my hands, the screen facing down on the pavement. There was no closure in her apology, no peace in her words, only more confusion, more unanswered questions. I continued walking, my mind racing. Every step felt like I was trudging through wet sand, like I was being dragged down into a place I didn't want to go. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Not while everything felt so broken. Hours passed, and before I knew it, I found myself at the edge of the park, the same park I had gone to the night before, when everything first started to unravel. It felt almost like fate had led me here, like this place was where I needed to be to truly think, to face the reality of what had happened. I sat down on the same bench, the silence of the night surrounding me, and I let myself breathe. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to process everything. The pain, the anger, the disbelief, it all started to wash over me, and I let it. I let it consume me, because I knew that if I didn't, I would never be able to move forward. As I sat there, staring out at the darkened path in front of me, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. But I realized then that I couldn't keep living in the past, couldn't keep holding on to a version of Claire that no longer existed. She had changed, and I had too. We had both been drifting for so long, caught in a web of things left unsaid, and now it was time to let go. I stood up slowly, my body feeling heavy with exhaustion, but a part of me felt lighter. Not whole, not yet, but lighter. The truth had come to me, in a way that was far from easy, but it had come. And now, I had to face it. I had to face the fact that my marriage was over, that Claire was gone in a way I hadn't prepared for. But even as I walked away from the park, there was something else I felt beginning to rise within me, a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to stay broken. I wasn't going to let this define me. I was going to find my way back. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I would. Claire had made her choice. And now, it was time for me to make mine. I pulled my phone out again, this time to send a message, but it wasn't to Claire. It wasn't to anyone I knew. It was to myself. A simple sentence, but one that held all the weight of what I had just learned and everything I was about to discover. I'm done being someone else's story. It was time to write my own. The days after I sent that message to myself were a blur of emotions. I let myself feel everything. The hurt, the anger, the confusion, but I also allowed myself to feel something else. Hope. It wasn't an easy thing to grasp, not after everything that had happened, but it was there, quietly waiting in the background, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, dark storm. I stopped checking my phone obsessively, stopped waiting for Claire's messages that would never come. I focused on my own healing, something I hadn't done in years. I started taking walks in the mornings, finding solace in the quiet of the early hours. I reached out to old friends, people I had neglected while I'd been caught in the cycle of my marriage. I even picked up old hobbies, writing, sketching, things that made me feel alive again. It wasn't instant. I didn't wake up one morning and feel magically okay. It was a slow process, one that took patience and self-compassion. But little by little, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I realized that, despite everything, I was still here. And I was still whole. About a month later, I found myself back in the same park where everything had changed. But this time, it was different. The bench I had sat on, the one where I had faced the reality of my situation, didn't feel like a place of loss anymore. It felt like a marker of progress, a symbol of how far I had come. As I sat there, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the trees, I finally felt at peace with what had happened. The relationship with Claire was over, yes, but it didn't define me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, they had been painful, but they didn't have the power to hold me captive anymore. I had learned something invaluable in the weeks that followed. I had learned that life is unpredictable, that things don't always go the way we plan, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. I had learned that I am capable of healing, of finding strength even in the most difficult moments. And as I sat there, taking in the beauty of the moment, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a new life. One that wasn't defined by anyone else, but by me. I had the power to shape my own future, to write my own story. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely excited about what was to come. The road ahead was uncertain, and I didn't know where it would take me, but I knew I was ready. Ready to live for myself. Ready to explore, to grow, and to embrace whatever adventures life had in store. And so, I stood up from the bench, taking one last look at the park before walking away. This time, I wasn't running from something. I was walking toward everything that was still waiting for me. It was the first step of many, but it was the most important one. A new beginning had arrived, and I was ready for it.